Good evening. Good evening. I'd like to welcome you all here tonight.
Check that, Maria, sound okay?
Maria, is the sound okay? All right, good. Yeah, so thank you very much for coming tonight.
Louder. Can't hear you.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good evening again. Glad to have you here. And before we get into our program, I'd like to say a few words about Windham World Affairs Council. We've been around for 62 years. It's hard to believe. I don't think anyone is here. We still have a couple members from way, way back, but not that far back. We're one of the smallest members and perhaps one of the more active members of an organization called the World Affairs Council of America. It's an independent, nonpartisan organization. It's dedicated to engaging the public and leading global voices to better understand. That sounds better.
Yes.
Thank you. To better understand America's international role and policy choices that impact our daily lives and our future. We are committed to making our speakers and events accessible to all and to make them entirely, we rely entirely on support from the public, from you all, and to make that possible. Our support derives mainly from membership donations and from the donations that perhaps you may hear this evening. For memberships, our student memberships are free. Individual is $35 a year. Families are $50 a year, and a life membership is a one-time payment of $500. And you can join online via our website at windhamworldaffairscouncil.org, or come talk to any of the board members. And board members, if you'd raise your hands, or to Gigi, wait at the back of the desk when you came in. A perk of membership, besides helping to support all those good things, is the inclusion of, every month we have a salon. It's for our members only, and it's here in 118, and where we can chat and discuss some things of interest. Let's see, and there's other things that your membership supports is our youth outreach and mentoring programs, particularly an organization called Peace Jam, which we launched at the Brattleboro Union High School in 2022 with our fellow board member Jody Williams, who received a Nobel Prize for her work. A couple of upcoming events, roughly a month from now, on the 19th of June, Tamara Stein, and Tara, where are you?
Right here.
There we go, right there, is going to be speaking here. It's a book launch for a book she's written called The Profitable Good, a bold playbook for sustainable business growth. It's going to look at exploring how you can build a more sustainable and reliant local community through an interactive, sustainable lens game focused here on Vermont, probably on Brattleboro. Something else is happening the last Friday of this month. We're going to have our annual members meeting. So if you become a member or are a member, we'd love to see you there. It's going to be on the 29th of May at the Kiwanis Shelter at the top of Living Memorial Park from, Merrill, 6 to 8?
Yes.
Okay, 6 to 8. And I think that's it. Oh, one more thing. You should all receive a little questionnaire when you came in. If you didn't, Gigi will have them. It's a little survey about this evening and stuff, and we very much appreciate if you can fill it in and just drop it off at that desk where Gigi's sitting. And so tonight I'm really honored and privileged to introduce our speaker. Paul Vincent is Professor Emeritus of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Keene State College. He's taught history and Holocaust studies there for 32 years. He helped establish he's directed the Cohen Center for Holocaust Studies there and helped establish Keene State's academic major in Holocaust and Genocide Studies. He's been a fellow at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and a Fulbright Scholar at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. He's the author of a couple books that I know about, and perhaps others, but one's the Politics of Hunger, about the Allied Blockade of Germany in World War I, and the Historical Dictionary of Germany's Weimar Republic, which ran from the end of World War I to when Hitler came into power. And with that, Paul, welcome you up here. We're looking forward to this very much.
Thank you, Paul. It was easy for us to remember each other's names. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation from Paul. Bob Beck, I don't think is with us tonight, but Bob recommended me to call. And thank you to Meryl as well. We've been pen pals for a little while here, for a few months. And everything went so smoothly when we got here, and that's a lot. This was really hard to get the screen to work and get the PowerPoint working, and I want to give an extra nod to Ember because I don't think we would be going without her. This is a fascinating subject, and I'm going to admit that it's one that, even though I have touched upon it in courses I've taught, it was not something that was readily available to me as a presentation to give. And so I've spent a good deal of time over the last couple of months in particular just boning up on this, and I've learned so much myself that I was not aware of before. I tested out both for my master's and my PhD for the first one of my 3 fields was U.S. diplomatic history, and one of my 5 fields for the PhD was U.S. diplomatic history. So I had that familiarity, and it related better than anything else outside of European studies, which is what I really focused on. And it led to my teaching a seminar at Keene State College on Germany and the United States in the 1930s, which I think, because of that diplomatic connection there, was absolutely useful to me in my studies. I want to begin by quoting a couple of paragraphs from an article by Henry Stimson. And I'll say a little bit about Henry Stimson after I've quoted these 2 paragraphs here. The Challenge to Americans is the title of the article. It was published in Foreign Affairs, which is the publication of the Council on Foreign Affairs, which was established in the 1920s. A little older than your organization. But not a whole lot, yeah. So, we Americans published, let me back up, published in October 1947. October 1947, okay? We Americans today face a challenging opportunity, perhaps the greatest ever offered to a single nation. It is nothing less than a chance to use our full strength for the peace and freedom of the world. This opportunity comes when many of us are confused and unready. Only 2 years ago, we triumphantly ended the greatest war in history. Most of us then looked forward eagerly to the relative relaxation of peace. Reluctantly, we've now come to understand that victory and peace are not synonymous. Over large areas of the world, we have nothing better than armed truce. In some places, there is open fightings. Everywhere, men know that there is yet no stable settlement. Close on the heels of victory has loomed a new world crisis. Particularly to Americans, the appearance of disquieting facts and possibilities has been upsetting. We're having our first experience of constant full-scale activity in world politics. Let me repeat that sentence. It's so powerful because it puts you back to 1947. We are having our first experience of constant full-scale activity in world politics. Other nations have lived for years as principles in the give and take of diplomacy. Until now, we have been, except in wartime, on the fringe. It is no wonder that, when suddenly placed at the center of the alarms and excursions of international affairs, we are abnormally sensitive. And of course, it does not help to find ourselves selected as chief target for the abuse and opposition of very bad-mannered groups of men who take their orders from the Kremlin. It is not surprising then that many of us are confused and unhappy about our foreign relations, and that some are tempted to seek refuge from their confusion, either in a retreat to isolationism or in suggested solutions whose simplicity is only matched by their folly. In the main, our difficulties arise from an unwillingness to face reality. Those are 2 paragraphs by a man that I would suspect many of you have not heard of. Henry Stimson had just finished a period as the Secretary of War. I should say a little bit about that term. He was born in 1867. He was born in Manhattan. He went to Yale. He got his law degree at Harvard. He was appointed by Teddy Roosevelt as the attorney for the Southern District of New York. He then became the Secretary of War for William Howard Taft. This is before World War I. After the war, he becomes the Governor General in the Philippines. He's then pegged by Herbert Hoover to be his Secretary of State. He is a conservative Republican. And I use the words conservative in a way that it used to be used. Okay. He was a conservative Republican who in 1940, Franklin Roosevelt asked to be his Secretary of War. In 1940, Pearl Harbor hasn't happened yet, but Roosevelt has a premonition that we're going to be involved in the war. And so he becomes his Secretary of War, which puts him in charge of the Army. And he holds this position until the fall of 1945, until after the war is over. He leaves the position. He's just had a heart attack. It's the first of 2 heart attacks he has. But he is a Republican internationalist. And I say that because there were Republican isolationists, and there was a large group of Republican isolationists. Roosevelt had the good sense to say, we're going to get into a war that is it's not a partisan war. It's a war that's going to affect us whether we're Republicans or Democrats. And I need Stimson. He understands the Army. Wilson actually had him work for him, even though he was no longer secretary during the First World War, in reorganizing the Army. And so this is what he does during World War II. I'll mention Marshall real soon, but it's important to know that they were very close at this point. He recognizes what's happening, and he writes this article. And this was at a time, this is before television, people were reading articles, and people were so impressed by this. They were impressed by Stimson. If I had to compare him to anybody else in our history, it might be Benjamin Franklin. He is the elder statesman at this point. He's been around for a long time. He's going to die in 1950 with his second heart attack. But he gives himself to this. He becomes a speaker in the country, traveling hither and yon, talking about what the needs are associated with the Marshall Plan. So I want to start with that because I think it's particularly important for you to understand who this man was, but also recognize his understanding of where Americans were at this particular point. This was not an easy time for Americans. We had never been involved in world affairs in this fashion. And that certainly separates us from where the world comes 80 years later. What was the Marshall Plan? It becomes known as the European Recovery Program. And what it does, it distributes roughly $13.2 to $13.3 billion between 1948 and 1951. Unbeknownst to me, I thought most of this money went to Germany, but it doesn't. The majority, the largest portion of it goes to Great Britain. France is second, Italy is third, and Germany is fourth. But it also goes to the Netherlands, and it goes to 12 other countries: Austria, Belgium, Denmark, Greece, Iceland, Ireland, Luxembourg, Norway, Portugal, Sweden. Switzerland's on the list, but they end up not taking any money. But also Turkey, Switzerland joins what we know of as the OEEC, that's the Organization for European Economic Cooperation. That still exists today. It's created at this time. How do you explain the Marshall Plan? This is so unusual for a country to do this. There are unique historical circumstances in 1945. At the end of the war, the United States dominated the world economically. You might also say it dominates the world militarily, even though the Soviet Union has a bigger army. But we have a monopoly on atomic weapons in 1945. It's a monopoly that will hold for the next 4 years. So the US is at the apex of its power. It accounts for roughly half of the world's manufacturing output. Half of the world's manufacturing output. This allows the United States to experiment in a revolutionary diplomacy. It could have used its power to pull back to be isolationist once again. But the memories of what happens in the 1920s and 1930s are still too fresh in people's minds. There is little desire to repeat the mistakes of the 1920s and 30s. So the US chose, many people grudgingly, but they chose instead to spend enormous sums on foreign aid, to build up multinational, multilateral agencies, for international cooperation. All of these agencies become part of what was known as liberal world order. What was created with powerful US leadership in just a few short years are the United Nations. Now it gets its start before the war ends. At Dumbarton Oaks in Washington, DC, there's a conference that goes on for almost 2 months. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Organization for European Economic Cooperation, NATO comes along in 1949. These are all predecessor organizations for the European Union and for the World Trade Organization. These are all created between 1945 and 1949. There's a president that we've heard of who says that these were all created to screw the United States on trade. That is not true. In fact, it is just the reverse. The integration, this was aimed at the integration of Europe economically and ultimately militarily. These were all components of a US strategy known as containment. It's a very important word, containment. It's fathered by a diplomat named George Kennan. I'm sure many of you have heard of George Kennan. He's widely forgotten today. And European integration is truly at the heart of the Marshall Plan. Now, everything that I'm saying here simply cannot be understood without the backdrop of the Second World War. That's mentioned by Stimson, and it needs to be foremost in your mind. During the Second World War, the United States and the Soviet Union, also Great Britain, were allies. The common enemy was Nazi Germany. You could say, well, the common enemy was also Imperial Japan, but for the Soviet Union, they don't get involved in the war until the last 2 weeks of the war. Now, what is important in remembering this is understanding that the Soviet Union lost, and these are figures that have come out in the last 20 to 30 years, 27 million people. The Second World War took 65 million people. So the amount of loss that the Soviet Union had is just astronomical. It is approximately 14 times more than the losses of the United States and Great Britain put together. That has to have an enormous impact on the psyche of a country. And it always has to be kept in mind. When the Allies gathered at Tehran in November of 1943, Stalin said, "The best found friendships are those founded on misunderstanding." By Tehran, the Red Army was on the offensive. The Battle of Stalingrad ended at the beginning of February of 43. From that point on, Germany's possibility of launching an offensive was terribly crippled. And then it was destroyed at the Battle of Kursk in the summer. From that point on, the Wehrmacht was on the defensive. Stalin had recognized his preeminence by the time November comes along, his importance vis-a-vis Churchill and Roosevelt, and he had already developed far-reaching plans for post-war Poland. In fact, misunderstandings between the US and the USSR were significant already by the end of the Second World War. FDR believed, for example, that the Soviets would contain themselves within the borders that they had at the beginning of the war. Now, those borders, by the way, had already changed as a consequence of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. And those borders included the Baltic states and included a chunk of Eastern Poland, rather, that had been made part of Ukraine. Stalin was not going to be satisfied with that. Now, Stalin believed, on the other hand, that the Americans would go home, that they would follow precisely the same example that they had set for themselves in the First World War. This is a country that does not get involved in international affairs. And to some degree, Roosevelt had led him to believe this, because Roosevelt knew how much Americans wanted the troops to come home. Now, profound misunderstandings were evolving already in the last months of the war. At Dumbarton Oaks, this is a great example. This is a conference that takes place in August, September, and into October, which is laying out the foundation of the UN. At Dumbarton Oaks, the Soviet Union asked for 16 seats in the General Assembly. Remember, it is the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and there are 16 of us. Okay? Well, as you might imagine, the United States responded, then we want 48 seats, because there are 48 states, before Hawaii and Alaska, obviously. So they backed off. They got 3. They got Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Okay? They also demand a veto in the Security Council. They get that, and that has played into our hands as well as theirs over the decades. At Yalta, in February of '45, promises were made regarding Poland that were quickly broken. In fact, they were being broken even before Roosevelt died in April. And you could almost see that this could happen, because there was an uprising of the Polish Home Army in the fall of 1944. Many of you are probably aware of that. The Red Army was on the other side of the Vistula River, and if you've been to Warsaw, you can see easily over the Vistula River, and the Red Army stays on that side of the river until the Nazis have basically wiped out the Home Army, and then they continue west towards Berlin. There is then this creation of a Stalin-allied government in Poland fairly quickly. You have the murder of anti-Soviet Polish elements, and all of this is happening, at a time when Americans still feel that they can work with Stalin. After the war ended, the Soviet Union aggressively pursues territorial claims in Iran and in Turkey. They refuse to withdraw, and Truman sends a fleet into the Mediterranean, and they back off, and they remove their troops. A key watershed, however, comes in February of 1947. The British, and this is so significant, the British are almost bankrupt as a country. The British ambassador in DC delivers what's called a blue document for Secretary Marshall. Marshall has only been Secretary of State for a couple of weeks at this point. A blue document is something that is deemed of very significant importance. And it announces, he reads this, it announces that Britain will withdraw 40,000 troops from Greece within the next 6 weeks. These troops had been in Greece to defend the Greek government against communist insurgents. Now, because they're about to go bankrupt, they have to cease all aid to both Greece and Turkey at this point. The announcement comes as a bombshell to the State Department. There was an understanding of the weakness of the British economy, but they didn't understand how desperate that they were. In fact, by this point, Stalin is already moving his focus away from Greece and starting to look much more at the central target for him, which is Germany. But Truman at this point reorients his policy from a withdrawal from Europe to engagement in Europe. And he promises that the US would support free peoples resisting outside subjugation. This is a shift. This is a shift that he makes in what is called his Truman Doctrine speech in March of 1947. It marks a major shift. And what's fascinating is he makes this speech at a point when Marshall is already in the Soviet Union. He's already in Moscow. Let me just say a few words about Marshall. He serves as the Chief of Staff of the Army. He is a virtuoso organizer. He inspires everybody around him. He expands the Army 40-fold to 8 million soldiers in a matter of 3 years. In 1943, in fact, he is referred to as the indispensable man. He wanted command over Operation Overlord. FDR, however, indicated that he needed him in DC. He said, "I can't imagine being in Washington without you." He's a fascinating person in so many ways. When asked his political persuasion, he said, "My father was a Democrat, my mother was a Republican, I'm an Episcopalian." This is a man who never voted. On principle, he felt as a military officer to make a choice on the ballot would suddenly make him think he was a Republican or a Democrat. And he refused to do that. He refused to do that. Now, President Truman had dispatched Marshall to China in December of 1945. Marshall has just left his position as Chief of Staff of the Army. I mean, within weeks, he is now being sent to China. Truman referred to Marshall as the greatest living American. And now, I mentioned this relationship between Stimson and Marshall. Their offices were right next to each other. Not only that, but there was a door inside the offices which connected them, and that door was always open. They worked so well together. It's just incredible when you think about this. So a few weeks after he's left his position, he heads off to China. He's got a diplomatic mission there to do what? To make sure that the civil war that was occurring in China prior to the invasion by the Japanese in 1937 does not start up again. So he's there to work with Chiang Kai-shek and to work with Mao Zedong. He stays there 13 months. 13 months. Both sides reject his proposals. He returns to the United States then in January of 47. Marshall would oppose sending troops to China after his experience with both of these men. I cannot imagine that you would find another photograph of Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong standing next to each other. These people were not friends. Okay. Mao Zedong's communists are going to win in 1949. It's amazing how I say that. This was not planned, but we have a president who's just come back from China, and the issue of Taiwan is so tied to the history that goes back to Chiang Kai-shek. Truman appoints Marshall as Secretary of State on the 21st of January 1947. Keep in mind, I just said he's just come back from China. He's just come back from a failed mission in China, which he's given his all, and he's kind of worn out. He never gets a break here. And you find that, why does he do this? His Secretary of State was James Burns. James Burns was somebody that Truman had known. They were in the Senate together. He saw James Burns as an excellent negotiator, but he gradually found that James Burns was a little too soft on the Soviets, and that he was doing things without telling him what he was doing. And he felt he needed somebody. He felt he needed somebody who was not political. And Marshall was likely the most well-regarded and least politicized leader in the United States at the time. And he had been an organizational magician during the Second World War. He couldn't bring Chiang Kai-shek and Mao together, but he had been very successful before this. Now, very soon after becoming Secretary of State, the 9th of March, Marshall arrives in Moscow for maybe the most consequential meeting of his life. Most importantly, he meets with Vyacheslav Molotov, the man standing right next to him in this photograph here. This is called the Council of Foreign Ministers. This was started right after the Second World War, the meeting of these four men. It was supposed to include China as well as a fifth, but the Chinese never got involved in this. But these four men met on a regular basis. It could be in Moscow, it could be in Paris, it could be in DC, it could be in London. Along with Molotov and Marshall, you see Ernest Bevin. He's got the big glasses on there. He is the British Foreign Secretary. And Georges Bidault, who is the French Foreign Minister in this case. The latter two are generally in agreement with Marshall in these meetings. They have their own issues that do separate them from the United States at various times. Now, it's almost impossible to imagine today a Secretary of State going to a 6-week meeting. That's how long George Marshall was in Moscow. Now, I remember back, as many of you probably do, when Henry Kissinger was in Paris, and that actually went over for several years. But Kissinger flew back and forth. He didn't spend all that time in Paris. Some of you might remember that it took several weeks just to determine what size the table would be and whether it would be round or square. So diplomacy has always been a difficult issue, obviously. So daily negotiations. He met daily with Molotov. Hours they would spend together, never coming to closure. Never coming to closure. But that's how serious the United States was on finding out if they could still cooperate with the Soviet Union. Two key issues kept them apart. The first was a rather narrow issue dealing with reparations. The Soviet Union was demanding $10 billion in reparations from Germany. That would be, well over $100 billion today. Marshall refused to discuss this. After the experience of the First World War and the years that followed, where the United States ended up being stuck with German reparations, the United States had no stomach for the issue of reparations, following the pattern that had happened after the First World War. The second conflict was deeper and more profound. Neither the United States nor the Soviet Union could abide a united Germany that was an ally of the other. And by this point, there was already an understanding that if a country was neutral it was probably going to be infiltrated with communists and taken over. That's what happened largely in Poland. So they meet all of this time, after 6 weeks of negotiation. He finally gets a meeting with Stalin. Marshall says to himself, I can't get anywhere with Molotov. Maybe if I meet with Stalin, things will be better. He found Stalin just as intractable as Molotov. I cannot imagine spending hours every day for days and weeks and not making any progress. Marshall returns to D.C. on the 26th of April, 1947. Already on the plane, he was writing down what needed to happen. He invited George Kennan to his office the very next day. He gave him a responsibility of putting together a plan which becomes the Marshall Plan. Kennan gathers together some specialists. They work their tails off for about 10 days. There was some editing done for all of this. By this point, the reality is there that the cooperative relationship that we thought we were going to have after Yalta and Potsdam is dead. It's dead. It's not going to happen. Marshall's conclusions lead rapidly in May 1947 to the outline of what becomes the Marshall Plan. Now these ideas are already, you'd have to say, on the back burner. Truman's speech back on the 12th of March, 47, embraces certain hardline principles already. That is, that the United States will oppose aggressive movements that seek to impose totalitarian rule. But Truman provides very little evidence of how to pursue this. There's no proposal for military assistance. He does mention economics. He does mention financial aid. Why does he mention economics and doesn't mention military assistance? I've kind of alluded to this. In May of 45 is when VE Day, or Victory of Europe Day, comes about. The United States had over 3 million soldiers in Europe. Roosevelt had pledged at Tehran that he would withdraw U.S. troops from Europe at the war's end. New to office, Truman is committed to carrying out FDR's pledges. The American public, moreover, is demanding it. They won't tolerate a lengthy post-war occupation of Europe. Moreover, by this point, the war with Japan has not yet ended. So the military budget collapses from $963 billion in 45 to $95 billion in 48. You can do the math, okay? The Army drops from 8.2 million to 685,000. By the way, we have 453,000 in the military today. So significant. We live in a different world. We live in a different world where manpower is not as significant as it was 80 years ago. You simply could not rely on the military to shore up U.S. interests in Europe under these circumstances. So an aggressive policy based on economics would seem to be the only possible approach to the circumstances of 1947. In fact, military leaders played a key role in fashioning this approach. Former Secretaries Henry Stimson, you can probably guess that he is the one on the far right, as well as his successor, Robert Patterson, were involved in this. Secretary of the Navy, James Forrestal, who becomes the first Secretary of Defense in October of 1947. Ben Stile, who has written a marvelous book on the Marshall Plan, refers to Forrestal as a hawk's hawk. I guess you might think of him as the Lindsey Graham of 1947. I've never found a war that I didn't like. Yet Forrestal testifies before Congress that the Marshall Plan would be far less expensive than standing isolated and alone in an unfriendly world. Secretary of the Navy. Actually, by this point, he is actually Secretary of Defense. Let me just explain that for a moment, because we did have a Secretary of War, and he was in charge of the Army, and we had a Secretary of the Navy who was in charge of the Navy, of course. When we created a separate Air Force, as opposed to the Army Flying Corps, there was a decision was made, we need a Secretary of Defense who stands above these three service secretaries. And, you know, without being political, the idea of turning it back to the Secretary of War is not a position that we ever held, because that was only the Army at that particular point. So the underlying philosophy evolving here in 1947 was America's political and economic security depended upon it having allies that were independent countries abroad. Okay? And I would say parenthetically, that is more important today than it was in 1947. In 1945, the US accounted, and I've said this before, for more than half of the world's manufacturing output. I've also noted that it had a monopoly on atomic weapons. The United States was a hegemonic power. Okay? The ancient general and philosopher Thucydides said, "The strong do as they can, and the weak suffer what they must." The United States chose not to follow that philosophy. America did what it could to help those who suffered. That's one underlying principle. It's not the only one, but it's one underlying principle of the Marshall Plan. Today, by the way, we account for less than a quarter of the world's manufacturing output. Many other countries have powerful militaries, and many other countries have atomic weapons. We need allies far more today than we did in 1947. So who are the key architects of this? It's a remarkable group. And although I'm going to pick here four, it goes beyond these four. George Kennan. George Kennan is the author of the containment policy, excuse me. He writes this up in two articles that appear in Foreign Affairs. And he felt that economic aid is essential to a geopolitical strategy in dealing with the Soviet Union. We need to avoid war with the USSR, but demonstrate at the same time our strength in our resolution. And we can do that economically. Kennan knows Russia. He has spent a long time in the Soviet Union. And he understands that country better than anyone does. William Clayton is in the middle, the center picture here. He's Undersecretary of State for Economic Affairs. He's been brought to my attention by Ben Steele as somebody who is not recognized. He's terribly important. He receives too little recognition. Steele argues that Clayton was the father of the European Union. That's a major statement, okay? Clayton makes European unity a centerpiece of the Marshall Plan. Unless countries can work together, unless Belgium is prepared to work with Holland and vice versa, unless, more importantly, France is prepared to work with Germany and vice versa, this is not going to work. We've got to make sure that there is cooperation. The Organization of European Economic Cooperation is, in fact, his baby. Okay? So Clayton is terribly important. General Lucius Clay, he's clearly not a member of the State Department, okay? But he is the U.S. military governor of Germany between March of 1947 and into 1949. He's not part of Marshall's team working for European recovery. But it's Clay who makes this remarkable reversal of policy in Germany. Clay goes over there thinking that the Morgenthau Plan, which is aimed at getting rid of German industry and kind of agriculturalizing the whole country. He is ready to support that. He makes a 180-degree change and determines, no, that's the wrong thing to do, and he comes to play a major role with the Marshall, with the diplomats working for Marshall. He deserves enormous credit. He is in Berlin. He's celebrated in Berlin. He's celebrated in Berlin as the father of the Berlin airlift. If you have been to Berlin, my wife and I were in Berlin a few years ago, and if you go to the area called Dahlem, you will find, in fact, Clay Allee, and that isn't an alley. It's a very broad street, and there is a magnificent museum there devoted to the Berlin airlift, and he's beloved by the Germans. Senator Arthur Vandenberg is the one in front of the microphone here. He is a Republican. He is chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Keep in mind that Truman, at this point, is faced with a Republican Congress. Roosevelt was never faced with a Republican Congress. But in 1946, there is an election, and both the Senate and the Congress go Republican. The Republicans still contain a good deal of isolationists, not in the least interested in foreign aid, far more interested in providing a peace dividend for their constituents. They don't want to give Harry Truman any victories. And in their minds, Truman is an accidental president. Don't forget, Roosevelt picked him in 1944 to be his running mate, as opposed to Henry Wallace, which was a great decision, by the way. And he dies just a few months later. So Truman is still getting his sea legs here as president. There's an interesting story that I read while I was doing my research. When the elections of '46 occurred, Truman was home in Missouri, and he comes back and he comes to Union Station, and usually when a president arrives at Union Station, there's a greeting party for him. The only one there was Dean Acheson. And he always remembered Dean Acheson doing this. Dean Acheson was really an upper class kid. Went to Yale, and Truman was kind of a poor Midwestern farmer, and but they became the best of friends here. Vandenberg's active cooperation and support is unbelievable. Vandenberg had been an isolationist, and he does a complete change. Steele feels that if FDR had lived, FDR would certainly have become a cold warrior, just as Truman did. But there would have been a problem because Roosevelt and Vandenberg did not get along at all. They did not like one another. That was not the case with Truman. Truman and Vandenberg cooperated very effectively. Even more effectively was Marshall and Vandenberg. They became friends and they worked very closely together. Now, so these people, I don't know if you took any of these out, I'm not convinced that this would have succeeded. But it's not just them. There, of course, is the Secretary of State himself, Marshall. He's not as involved in the details. Again, that's largely Kennan and his team. But Marshall becomes a terrific salesman. So in June of '47, Marshall presents an outline in a speech he gives at Harvard. It's his commencement address. Clark Clifford, some of these names I know because they were still around in the 1960s. Clark Clifford is Truman's White House counsel. And Clifford gets a hold of the speech. He hears about it, he reads it, and he goes to Truman and he says, you know, this is a good idea. We should call this the Truman Plan. And Truman, this is 80 years ago, okay, Truman, who is a very wise and astute politician, laughs. And he turns to him and he says, he says, don't be ridiculous, Clark. Anything going before Congress with my name on it will twitch a few times, roll over on its back, and die. But even the worst Republican would not vote against a plan named after the general. And he immediately calls it the Marshall Plan. In fact, it's known as the Marshall Plan before it's known as the European Recovery Act or European Recovery Program. There's a great difference that I bring to mind here. So Marshall's address at the Harvard commencement, this was the 5th of June, 1947. It was very brief, 15 minutes. It was deliberately vague for two reasons. First, Marshall was absolutely determined by this point that Europe had to have ownership of this plan. While the United States was going to supply the funding, it did not want to be seen as an America imposing funds that needed to be used in a special way. It was essential that the European states cooperate with one another. And this once again gets back to William Clayton. And then come to the United States with proposals that they are agreed upon. Also, he outlines that this plan is to cover 4 years. This is not going to be a one-time distribution of funds. It's going to start in 1948 and go through 1951. Now, secondly, and this is a rather Machiavellian aspect of Marshall's plan, Marshall made the European Recovery Program open to all European states, including Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. He wanted Stalin to reject it, but he wanted to ensure that the Soviets were invited to participate. He counted on Stalin rejecting it. Now, he got this advice from Kennan. Kennan told him that Stalin will reject it. It made everybody nervous. State Department officials struggled over how they would respond if Stalin wasn't Stalin and decided to accept this. You know, if he accepted this, and this is what Kennan put forward, he said that Marshall should say, this is wonderful. Europe needs another creditor. Not just the United States, but the Soviet Union is going to finance the stabilization of Europe. You can imagine how Stalin might have responded to that. That proposal was unnecessary, thank goodness. But what's intriguing is Stalin was aware of the European Recovery Program. He had an inkling of the desire to preclude the Soviet Union. Stalin had spies. We know that. He had spies in Washington, he had spies in London, especially spies in London. And we know some of the names, you know, Donald McLean, Kim Philby, Guy Burgess. These were the three guys that become so famous in the 50s, and I think up to about 1961 when Kim Philby was finally uncovered. But he was torn. The Soviet Union desperately needed US dollars. But you've got to keep something in mind which you know, strikes me as so naive. Stalin was a traditional thinker when it came to geopolitics, but he was thoroughly orthodox in his Marxism when it came to economics. Stalin believed that the United States was in the final phase of capitalism, and that the US was simply using the Marshall Plan as a way to bail out its own homegrown industry. Now, that said, Stalin would love to receive some of the monies that he received during the Second World War through Lend-Lease. And all of that ended at the end of the war. Now, Stalin had three strong reasons to reject the European recovery program. In 1944-45, Stalin believed that the United States was going to go home after the war. I already mentioned this. His spies kept telling him, no, that's not right. The United States is involved. The United States is going to stay in Europe. Until Marshall's speech in June of '47, he was still hanging on to the idea that the United States was going to leave. Secondly, the spies told him that to reintegrate Germany as an economic engine within Europeans' recovery was a major piece of the Marshall Plan. The UN, now these are the words that are used by the spies, the United States aimed to create a new West German puppet state. I don't think we think of states that we work with as our puppets, but that's a language that the Soviets used. The new West Germany would serve as Europe's industrial engine. Stalin also, and this was realistic, was fearful that the Soviets' new satellite states would want to join in the Marshall Plan. And that is true. Poland and Czechoslovakia were enthusiastic about this plan. Stalin quickly stepped on that. He vetoed that possibility. Okay? You need to note that before Marshall's speech at Harvard, Stalin is still interested in a cooperative relationship with the United States. Now, when I say cooperative, I don't by any means mean in a friendly sense. And Marshall already understood this as a consequence of his 6 weeks in Moscow. But he wanted that cooperation to take care of a lot of other peripheral issues. The real prize for Stalin by '47 was Germany. Stalin aimed ultimately to gain control over the entirety of Germany. And in May 1947, once he realized that this was not going to happen, he decided we need to move in another direction. Actually, in May '47, before Marshall's speech, he was putting out a cooperative plan to reunite Korea, South and North Korea, with the ultimate idea that all of Korea would ultimately be communist. Marshall's speech made Stalin realize that cooperation was an end. And I'd like to point out something that is said by Chip Bolin. Chip Bolin, or Charles Bolin, was also a Soviet expert. He and Kennan had been in Moscow together throughout a good deal of the Second World War. He is on the far left side in this picture, if Truman's on the other side. This is a great picture, by the way. This is Truman. Next to Truman is Robert Lovett. Lovett becomes the Deputy Secretary of State for a while when Dean Acheson leaves, and then Dean Acheson is going to come back. Next to him is George Kennan, and then Chip Bolin is on this end. Bolin and Kennan were very close while they were in Moscow. They were both Soviet experts, both Russian experts and Soviet experts. Bolin says this: in the summer of 1947, he writes this: the United States is now confronted with a condition in the world which is in direct variance with the assumptions upon which during and directly after the war, major U.S. policies were predicated. Instead of unity among the great powers on major issues of world reconstruction, both political and economic, there is complete disunity between the Soviet Union and its satellites on the one side and the rest of the world on the other. There are, in short, two worlds instead of one. That's Chip Bolin's analysis of what has happened now by the summer of 1947. Administrative support for the Marshall Plan is certainly coming. You have You have, for example, the two secretaries of war that I mentioned, Henry Stimson and Robert Patterson. But what you discover, and it's mentioned by one of the people I've read, you needed a Marshall Plan in order to get the Marshall Plan approved. The effort done in this country was remarkable. I've mentioned the speeches done by Stimson and others. There were powerful support all over the country. There were 300 people that traveled around the country in high positions making speeches. 3 special congressional committees were established. 27 days of testimony in the House and 30 days of testimony in the Senate. This began in January of 1948. Thousands of pages of testimony. Significant support from numerous well-respected organizations throughout the country who were very vocal. Okay? The National Farmers Union, the Daughters of the American Revolution, the League of Women Voters, the American Bar Association, the National Education Association, they were all involved in helping passage of the Marshall Plan. I think maybe the most powerful educational experience was congressmen traveling to Europe. 214 members of Congress traveled to Europe via military aircraft. They witnessed the dire circumstances in as many as 22 of the countries. I told you that 16 ultimately received aid. But what they saw, they didn't see anything like this in America. They had to go to Europe. You see here on the upper right-hand side a picture from London. Right below that, if you're familiar with Florence, Italy, you see that woman standing in Florence, Italy. Over here you see Rotterdam. And of course, you see Berlin here with the Brandenburg Gate. But you're just seeing the physical condition in these 4 pictures. There is so much more. There are thousands of orphans, literally thousands of orphans. Many of them are feral children. You know, they don't know where they're next. They're afraid of adults. They're living out in the woods. They're all over the place. And by 46, there are many Russian unwanted children, because when the Red Army comes through, rape and pillage, quite literally, is what they were about. And I don't mean just in Germany, although Germany was the worst example, but you see this in Poland, you see it in Hungary, you see it in Czechoslovakia as well. Germany not only had DP camps, because Germany had so much slave labor during the war, and trying to figure out what to do with not just Jews, but a lot of people are being forced to work in Germany. But you also have 12 million Germans who have been displaced. How do you find housing? How do you find housing for 12 million people? The railroads don't work. The bridges have been blown up. There's no communication. The farmers are only creating food for themselves because they don't trust the currency. And I'm not just talking about Germany. This is true in France. This is true in Italy. This is true in Greece. This is true. Europe is an absolute mess. You have almost 3 million people. The ethnic cleansing goes on at the end of the Second World War. The Czechs don't want any Germans anymore. 25% of their population before the war was German. Czechoslovakia becomes Czech and Slovak, and that's it. Okay. Poland becomes only Poles. The Poles only represented 66% of the population before the war. After the war, now they weren't all obviously Germans, but after the war the Germans are forced out. Not only are they forced out, but the borders are moved significantly west. So Germans who are living in, not just in the area that had been taken over, but living in the eastern part of Germany are now forced out. So the problems go way beyond these 4 pictures, but they give you a sense, at least, of what people are dealing with here. So, mentioned earlier is that Stalin was an ideologue regarding economics, but not regarding geopolitics. He had interfered with a light hand in the makeup of coalition governments in Eastern and Central Europe. That light hand was a bit heavier in Poland, as it turns out. But with Marshall's speech, Stalin cracks down brutally on every coalition, breaking up coalition governments, pushing out anyone who is Democrat or moderate socialist. This impacts Poland, it impacts Hungary, it impacts Romania, but most specifically, it impacts Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia is an important case because aside from Germany, it's the only country that is still kind of in play at this point. Czechoslovakia had legitimate elections in 1946. Their president, Edvard Beneš, was not a communist. They had a communist prime minister. His name was Klement Gottwald. But 2/3 of his cabinet were not communists. They were Democrats or otherwise socialists. All of them, including the communists, desperately wanted to take part in the Marshall Plan. Because the Czechs refused to be quiet, Stalin stages a coup in Czechoslovakia on the 25th of February, 1948. On the 25th of February, 1948, Congress is in hearings on the Marshall Plan. You can imagine the impact that this has on those hearings. Stalin instigates this takeover, removing all but the communists from the government. The others are arrested. Many of them are executed. I have a picture here of Jan Masaryk. Jan Masaryk was the Czech foreign minister. He's found dead on the 10th of March, roughly 2 weeks after this happens. Initially, they thought it was suicide. In the 1990s, it was demonstrated that he had been pushed out of a window and killed. He was a good man. His father had been one of the fathers of Czechoslovakia back at the end of the First World War. There were elections scheduled for May 1948, and it's quite likely that those elections would have very much gone against the communists had they taken over. The takeover of Czechoslovakia was an absolute bombshell. It frightened and it galvanized many of the Republicans in Congress. Many had been wavering for or against the European Recovery Act, which is what it's called at this point. From this point, they began to recognize that Stalin might repeat this action farther and farther into the West. So the Czech coup is kind of instrumental in drawing the Republicans on board. The European Recovery Act, again, the Marshall Plan, is approved during the month of March, and it is signed at the very beginning of April. And these are the votes. The Senate votes 67 to 17 in favor, and the House 329 to 74 in favor. I would suggest that this is a great example of Congress doing its work. Okay? It didn't end 80 years ago, but we have problems today. After the passage of, how much time do I have left? All right? I'll have to keep going. Okay. After passage of the European Recovery Act, Stalin moves to his next target, Germany. Stalin recognizes that the U.S. aims to create an independent Western Germany. And this objective has already become plain because in March of 48, the 5th of March 48, Great Britain, the United States, and France come together and decide to unite Western Germany and ultimately to create a separate state here. They believed, Stalin believes now that this is going to become the industrial engine that is part and parcel of the Marshall Plan. He institutes a blockade of Berlin on the 24th of June, 1948. General Lucius Clay, who you have met, plans to go to war. He is ready to go to war. He flies back to the United States and he cools off. And after a few days of nail biting, a great anxiety, because this is one of these moments, some of us remember this with the Cuban Missile Crisis, this is one of these moments where you think we could potentially flip into the Third World War. But they respond now, the Allies come together and respond with, I think, a very heroic airlift. It doesn't go well for the first couple of months, and this is something that I found out. There's a general by the name of Tanner. Some of you may know that name. He was responsible for the airlift of supplies over the Himalayas from India into China. He knew how to do airlifts, and he is brought to bear in September, and he does an incredible job of systematizing. His goal is to have a plane land every minute. He doesn't manage that, but a plane lands every 3 minutes. And it's just remarkable. The British coming in a corridor that was designed in the north, and the Americans coming in the corridor that comes from Frankfurt. Into Tempelhof, there was another airport in the British section, and then the French designed what becomes known as Tegel, which until a few years ago was the major airport in Berlin. The airlift doesn't, on its own, doesn't entirely defeat the blockade, because the United States and Western allies actually institute their own blockade, and we just put this up. And that blockade is designed first for East Germany, but then gradually it impacts all of Eastern Europe, including the Soviet Union. That blockade ends up being almost as devastating for the Eastern Bloc as the blockade that Stalin has put in place, which ends up not being that significant. In fact, by the end of the blockade, they have moved beyond just coal and food, and they're bringing in, tools and other things. There's one wonderful pilot who starts dropping chocolate bombs, and you've probably heard of this. He becomes famous. The children are so. And what happens here? And this is a remarkable piece of this story. What happens here is that people who just a short time before saw each other as enemies, they become friends in a way that was unimaginable to any of them before this happened. These pilots had been dropping bombs. Some of the Germans asked him, "What did you do in the war?" "I dropped bombs in Berlin." Well, but now I'm bringing food to Berlin. This is an incredible case of your friend becomes your enemy, and your enemy becomes your friend in this particular period. On the 12th of May, 1949, Stalin recognizes that his aim at absorbing West Berlin, which is what he wanted to do, has failed. And the blockade has not worked. In fact, it is a diplomatic embarrassment to Stalin and the Soviet Union, and he ends it. 11 days after the lifting of the blockade, the Federal Republic of Germany is established. It's on the 23rd of May, 1949. Interesting story here. Konrad Adenauer, he's already 73 years old at this point. He becomes the first Chancellor of Germany. He will serve for 14 years as Chancellor. He's got a fascinating history. He is the chairman of a new party called the Christian Democratic Union, the CDU. And it is a combination of Protestants and Catholics. The Catholics had their own party for a long period of time, from the what's called the Wilhelmine Empire up until the collapse of the Weimar Republic. He brings the two parts of Christianity together here. He had been what's called the Oberbürgermeister, the Lord Mayor of Cologne, from 1917 to 1933. when the Nazis take over. He is confirmed as Chancellor in the Bundestag by one vote. And if you think about this, well, that one vote was his. Now, there's a famous allusion here to Berlin that I think is important. Berlin was a social democratic city, controlled by the Social Democratic Party. The question came, should it be part of West Germany or not? The Social Democrats wanted it to become part of West Germany, and the leader of the Social Democrats is Kurt Schumacher. He's on the picture here. Schumacher was a fascinating guy. He had been imprisoned by the Nazis for 10 years, from 1933 to 1943. And he was so close to dying that his brother succeeded in getting him released from prison, from concentration camp. After he recovered, they put him back in, and he remained there until the end of the war. So a good man. Dean Acheson, who is now the Secretary of State, says no. Making West Berlin part of West Germany would be too provocative to the Soviets. Adenauer said no, and I have to believe, and this is a speculation that other historians have had, that if West Berlin had become part of West Germany, the Social Democrats would have had control, and Adenauer would not have been Chancellor. Now, Schumacher was so weak that he died a few years later, and it turned out that Adenauer was a very good chancellor. He was the chancellor that they probably needed. So now the geographic boundaries of the Cold War are really in place, and they will remain in place till 1989. I could follow through with more of a description of well, let me just say, Western Europe did recover, and it recovered quite well and quite quickly. The output from the 16 Marshall Plan countries grew by a whopping 60%. Now, it was almost nothing, so that might not sound like much, but you have a miracle occurring here. Was this historically due to the Marshall Plan? Not entirely. Economic studies that were done in the 60s demonstrate that imports were actually remained low. European government spending was not all that substantial. But Kennan and Clayton and Averell Harriman viewed the Marshall Plan as a pump primer. The aid they spread out over 4 years specifically for that reason. It will jumpstart European recovery. It would also show the Europeans that we were in for the long haul. We're not just to give them money and then go back into our cocoon. This served as a significant psychological inducement for private investment, and that's what happens. By itself, I think the $13.3 billion would not have led to the recovery. The aid virtually demanded that the Europeans work together. And as it turns out, France and Britain demanded that the US military be involved in making this work. Not just against the USSR. I think it's easy 80 years later to forget that the greatest fear, especially in France, was Germany. You were going to industrialize Germany again? France had been invaded by Germany 3 times in the last 100 years. Okay? We don't need this, okay? So the US got involved militarily. Truman desired to withdraw the military from Europe. You got to recall this. Initially, it was foreseen that the Marshall Plan was going to be the economic powerhouse that allowed us to bring our military home. It didn't work that way. Okay? In April of '49, this is weeks before Stalin had abandoned the blockade, NATO was founded. NATO's founding was a product of pressure from Britain and France. It should not be seen simply as an American creation. So I'm getting the sign that I should. Let me point out that after 40 years, we're going to get beyond him too. Henry Cabot Lodge, by the way, you just signed there. The fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989 has to be seen as a result of a variety of collaborations, in particular NATO and the European Union. And these remained attractive as ever. Countries in Central and Eastern Europe, they pleaded to join after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Soviet buffer unit, it's a Warsaw Pact, created as a consequence of NATO, it collapses. It collapses immediately. Let me give you just some quick takeaways. The tradition of American isolationism ends with the Marshall Plan. A containment policy is put in place for better and for worse. The U.S. decides to rebuild a former enemy. That's pretty remarkable. The Marshall Plan comes to be seen as a great humanitarian project, boosting cooperative economic development. It was both hard-headed and visionary. It protected vital interests for the United States, and it also did so without war. Today's European Union is a product of the Marshall Plan and the Organization for European Economic Cooperation. I will stop. It took a long time. Okay. Thank you.
You have time for questions? Questions?
May I ask a question?
Sure.
I know that you have been Professor Emeritus, you are Professor Emeritus of the Center for Genocidal and Holocaust Studies.
Yeah.
And you have painted such a commanding picture of what we did, what our country did in the reconstruction of Europe. And I want to ask you, as someone who knows genocide and knows about the Holocaust, what would it take for the United States to engage in a recovery of the destruction of Gaza? What would it take? Can we do it?
And why hasn't your organization never acknowledged the genocide?
I can't say that why does, say your first few words?
Why has the Cohen Institute never acknowledged the Gaza genocide?
I have been retired for 9 years, and I can't answer that. I can tell you my own feelings about what's happening, but I have to specify that they're mine. I feel what has happened in Gaza is at the very least mass atrocity. And I also believe that ethnic cleansing is going on. One of my friends, Omer Bartov, at Brown University, who is Israeli and who has served in the Israeli Defense Forces, says that this is genocide. I find what Israel has been doing absolutely abhorrent, especially in light of their own history. And I know that I'm not alone. This has become a frightening issue. I haven't been at a conference of Holocaust scholars since I retired. I think from what I've heard, those are very difficult conferences now. People who have been friends for decades are no longer friends because of the struggle over what's going on there. I don't see, and Omer Bartov is somebody that I know. We had him at Keene State College long ago, 25 years ago. And I have a lot of faith in his own judgment on this. I shake my head. I'm ashamed. I want to state I am a supporter of Israel. I studied there. But I think they have gone off the track.
Then you know what the Nakba is. Does anyone in this room know what the Nakba is?
Everybody in this room knows what that is.
Then the Windham World Affairs Council on Nakba Day should have a speaker that deals with the reconstruction of Palestine.
Hi, I'll comment as board chair. I'm Meryl Somner. We sincerely apologize for the oversight. We did not take it into account when we were doing our planning. By the way, our next event is on Juneteenth, so that speaks to our planning abilities that we will seriously take into account next year when we give this more thought. And thank you for coming and making us aware of it.
Yes?
Just to get back to the topic at hand, thank you for your extraordinary analysis and summary. I tried to do a quick calculation when you posted the amount of money distributed to the different countries. And it looked as though Italy and Germany, the two former enemies, received almost half of the total budget. Not quite, but I think it was about 45% anyway. Of the 13 billion, they got close to 6 billion. Those two countries together, Italy and Germany. And I only mention this because it's just so extraordinary to me, not that we would give aid to our allies, but we would give aid to our enemies, right?
Yeah.
Was that as revolutionary a concept at the time as I assume it must have been?
Yeah, it absolutely was. I think most people would say that if you look at everything throughout our diplomatic history, this is the high point. This is the high point. And you're right, it hadn't been done before. And to some degree, we did some of the same things in Japan as we did in Europe, separate from the Marshall Plan. I have that it was closer to 3 billion, 1.4 for Germany, 1.5 for Italy. So it's not quite as large a percentage as you're suggesting, but it's a lot. It's a lot of money. And you know what's interesting, and this puts us back into reality to some degree. When I first looked up in January what this amounted to in terms of our money today, it was a certain figure. That figure keeps changing, and it keeps changing because the value of the dollar keeps dropping. And I started to scratch my head because it was hard for me to say what the equivalent. This is not quite $1 trillion in our terms, but it is one heck of a lot of money if you put it into our figures for 2026. Yeah, Peter.
Wasn't there a great deal of economic benefit to the United States? Because there was a lot of excess manufacturing capacity. And by getting Europe going, they could then purchase our products.
Absolutely. It's to say that this is totally humanitarian without recognizing that it has an impact on the United States would be wrong-headed. It's not nothing is black and white here. There is the anxiety about communism. There's the anxiety about and this is something that I think ultimately separates George Kennan from some of the others. There's the anxiety about Russia. Russia outside of just communism. But in the process, you brought all of these countries out of the doldrums. In Germany, it was called the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. And it begins with the Marshall Plan, and by 1960, Germany is running on all cylinders. So, but you're right. There was a great fear in this country that with the war over, and the first couple of years we were not doing well, that we could sink back into the Great Depression. And I think that was kind of a position that maybe Stalin took. That's going to happen because they were in the late stages of capitalism. Didn't happen. Yeah.
I wonder if you think that the Marshall Plan would have occurred if it weren't for the stance of Russia and the Soviet Union at that point. I'm just trying to figure out how much of the incentive was humanitarian versus, trying to make sure we were defensive against the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And the other question I had is how much humanitarian aid was given to Europe between 1945 and 47.
It was enormous.
Oh,
There was
okay.
a lot of money given in those first couple of years,
Okay, I didn't know that.
but it wasn't given with the same strings attached over a 4-year period that these countries have to cooperate with one another. There was a bill passed in 47 before this, when it looked like Greece was going to collapse, and there was also fear of both France and Italy turning communist. And there was a lot of money, but it was stopgap. It was for that reason. When they got their heads together, I mean, this money was given as grants to every country with the exception of West Germany. And the reason was, France was calling for money to be given to them from Germany. And the United States says, we are the principal benefactor for any money that's given. And we're giving them a loan. And by the way, we're giving them a loan and we're not going to ask for it to be repaid. It was really tricky.
Yeah, that is.
And if you want money from us, you have to agree to that. Okay?
Yeah.
And they did, big time.
Yeah,
And then they worked together with the Germans. And two countries that had been at each other's throats for years, for decades, for a century and a half, suddenly became tight. And that's one of the most wonderful aspects of the Marshall
Thank you.
Plan. Yeah.
Maybe one or two more questions?
One, the Marshall Plan put in place the dollar as becoming the reserve currency of the world, which was just a huge change.
Yeah, the dollar displaces the pound big time by this point. There's so much more that could be said about this, but I already kept you an hour and a half.
Just one more, if I could. You talked about the Soviet Union and their extraordinary losses of life that they experienced. Magnitudes greater than any other country.
Anyone can imagine.
And they wanted reparations,
Yes.
as you said, apparently, and that was denied. When all this money was given to all the other countries, both our allies and our enemies, Germany and Italy, I can only assume that must have left a very bad taste in the mouth of the Soviet Union.
Of the Soviet Union. Yeah.
And was that has that been a thread in their thinking to this day, do you think?
I can't answer that for the current day, but I do want to point out that when the Red Army moved into Germany, they immediately began taking industries apart, taking factories apart, putting everything on trains and shipping it back to Russia. Okay, so they took a great deal from Germany after Germany lost the war. Now, this was the eastern part of Germany, but of course that eastern part of Germany stretched up towards Königsberg, which becomes Kaliningrad. There's a lot of area there. Now, a lot of this stuff they took back there, they put it out in fields, and it just rusted. They didn't make use of it. But nonetheless, they took a lot in a way that no other country did. Okay, so. I would say yes and no. One of the biggest tragedies was what happened with the Czech Republic, or Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was so afraid of Germany and so believed that the Russians were going to be helpful to them. And the Russians made a point of telling them, look at the Marshall Plan plans on building up Germany again, and you're going to have to worry about Germany again because of this. And within 2 years of the war, that is real. We're 80 years beyond that. It's hard for us to understand that. So it's one of these things I often tell my students, forget what you know happened. You have to put yourself back in the position of people in 1947 to understand, and that's difficult for any of us to do, but to understand the choices that are made.
Thank you very much.
We're here tonight to say to the Windham World Affairs Council that they should, on Nakba Day, May 15th, they should have a speaker that honors the Palestinian people and the loss that they have suffered. The speaker that they've had tonight is someone who comes from an institute who has never acknowledged the genocide. We believe that that's an aberration, and Windham World Affairs Council needs to understand, if they are truly a World Affairs Council, they need to understand the implications of their choices. This was a poor choice on the day that commemorates the Nakba.